Hello and welcome to the Glenn Mercer Show. You could find us across all your favorite podcast platforms. You could find us on YouTube, and please remember to subscribe. And you could find us at realmeneatplants.com. I am looking forward to speaking with our guest today because we have kind of circled each other over the years. I met John Pierre once or twice, I think, but I don't think we talked at any great length, and so I've never gotten to know him, but I know he's a close friend of some of my close friends. So, John Pierre, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Glenn.
Now, John Pierre has more than 35 years of experience in the nutrition and fitness fields. He has developed cutting edge programs with a blend of science and ancient modalities. And he's the author of two books, The Pillars of Health and Strong, Savvy, Safe. His websites are livingwithharmony.com, or is it .org?
.org.
Livingwithharmony.org and johnpierre.com. JP, you've had an unusual career.
Well, some would say that it's kind of vast. It's seeing everyone from kids with, Down syndrome to seniors that are, getting ready to decide if they should go into a rehab facility for, dementia, and lots of different celebrities and musicians and athletes and Fortune 500 CEOs. So a wide variety of clientele.
Right. So you have been a fitness trainer to celebrities, but you also work with them on nutrition as well, I assume, right? Probably with all your clients.
Yeah. Most of my work with everyone is pretty much nutrition and fitness and spiritual and psychological. That's the work that I do. It's kind of lifestyle enhancement. So I approach it from many different facets. In my first book, The Pillars of Health, we talked about plant-based nutrition. We talked about movement. We talked about enhancing cognitive functioning. And then we talked about love and compassion. So I utilize all those modalities for most of my clients. And then my second book, Strong, Savvy, Safe, which is really a guide for anybody, but particularly women, about mindset and safety and security and what we call situational awareness. So I include that still with everyone, especially when I'm working with kids, teaching them how to be safe, especially young girls that are dating. And there's a lot of online dating and things like that. So I pretty much cover all those things, but I'll focus on specifically what the client has a particular interest in.
So let's say you meet a client who's, 100 pounds overweight, badly out of shape, unhealthy, eating the standard American diet, maybe even depressed on top of it. How do you know where to start with the psychological approach, the fitness approach, nutrition? Where do you start?
That's a good question. And that really comes down to experience. It's kind of like in therapy, a therapist has that same issue. Where do they start with a client? Because there's so many areas to go to. So I generally I talk to them and see where they're at. I see what their interests are. But you have to understand, many clients that come to me, as a matter of fact, most of them that come to me wanting to lose weight, that weight gain is just a symptom of their particular issue. And for many of my clients that have had trauma, and I work a lot with trauma therapists, so I'm very involved in the trauma field. And so a lot of times those are issues that have to be addressed, because you just can't do, say, for instance, liposuction on somebody and take 50 pounds of body fat away, but you've never changed what's in between their ears. In other words, why have they been overeating? Why are they choosing the wrong foods? So you have to approach it from many different facets. But I generally like to see what's going on with them that got them to be 100 pounds overweight, and why are they eating poorly and not taking care of themselves, and why are there self-destructive behaviors? In other words, why isn't there love and compassion in their life? Did they not get it as a child and they weren't modeled that? They didn't think they deserved it? And so those are important things to consider when you're working with clients.
Now, the diet you recommend, the nutritional therapy that you recommend in general, and I'm sure you individualize it for individual people, but you generally recommend a whole food, low fat, plant-based diet, right?
Well, always a complete plant-based diet, not necessarily always low fat, because I do work with the elderly. and I do work with children. And especially when a parent brings in, particularly young children under 10, most of those kids, unless they're morbidly obese, I don't want them really restricting fats much. So I do want them getting healthy fats, wanting to get some walnuts or chia or flax seeds. But yes, you're right. For the most standard American that I'm working with, it's going to be a low-fat plant-based diet. Now, there's different tiers or different levels, because if I'm working with somebody that's a natural hygienist, that's really, doing pretty much everything right, there's little modifications I make there. But when I'm working with a guy that's a truck driver, and they'd say he's 300 plus pounds and sitting all day and eating cheeseburgers, that recommendation, you would be shocked at, because for a lot of times for that particular man or woman, I'm saying, well, do you think on your bacon double cheeseburger, we could just add some tomatoes? And for you and I, we would think, gosh, don't you want them to get rid of the hamburger and bacon? And of course, but you have to meet people where they're at. And if you go too extreme for them, it's going to be a big turnoff. And the other thing is, in our movement, we're all meaning well. There's a lot of people that keep pushing plant-based diets, and they want you to eat 1 to 2 pounds of vegetables and drink the shakes and, eat the sprouts. It's like you have to go slow with people when they're not used to high fiber diet, because they get a lot of GI issues, and that could be a big turnoff for them. But essentially, you're correct. A low-fat plant-based diet for most people, with a little bit of exceptions.
Now, so let's talk about this issue of going gradually on diet versus, turning into an overnight vegan. Do you feel that if somebody is eating really badly, meat 2 or 3 times a day, dairy, oils, sugars, that if they make gradual improvements, it may be too little, too late?
Of course, if somebody has just had a heart attack, you can't just, you can't just say, well, we're going to have meatless Mondays and the rest. But when you're working with an average person to get them their foot in the door and get them involved in the program, you have to understand, for you and I and many of your listeners, we take that for granted, eating fiber and whole grains and even eating vegetables and fruits. You'd be surprised, when I work with kids in the inner city, they don't eat any fruits or vegetables. And if you ask them what like a prune is, they've never even heard of a prune. They don't know what a date is or a raisin. They've never heard of arugula. They're basically eating Captain Crunch with whole milk and drinking like a Kool-Aid, and maybe getting a piece of white toast with butter on it.
And some of them are in food deserts as well.
Oh,
right?
Of course. So you have to meet people where they're at. And that's, as you asked earlier, how do you know where to begin? That's kind of the, when I'm first doing a session, that's kind of how I figure all that out. And you also have to see how resistant, because a lot of times parents will bring their children in to see me, and the children are resistant. So with the children, the last thing I want to do is turn them off to this. So I start with a smoothie. And I just ask the parents if we can make a predominantly sweet fruit smoothie and just put in 1 piece of green. And then once the child gets used to that, we just keep adding more greens, and we start changing the fruits from really sweet to something like a blueberry. So we get more blueberries. So you have to work with the client. But I love the clients that are, like, I work with people in our movement that have written books and they run retreats and they're famous. I work with them, and that's fun because I get to fine tune their program, really well. And I love doing that. But for the most people that I work with, it's just making minor changes. Like, I'll give you an example, like a product that I use like a green powder. And so like I'll use this powder, which is basically just a bunch of different greens that have been dehydrated and then blended up. And I'll just ask them if we could take a pinch of this and just water. So they just put a pinch of it in water, stir it up, and they drink it. And if they're doing a smoothie, the same thing. And that, for them, they're getting more phytochemicals and nutrients in that little pinch of concentrated greens than they would maybe in 3 weeks of normal eating. Now, you and you might not need that because you're eating so many greens and you're doing smoothies or blended soups. But for, normal clients, you have to meet them where they're at. And as you said, is it too little, too late? Yeah, that's a concern. That is a big concern with a lot of these people because they're 100, 150 pounds. Their arteries are already occluding. And so then I just do my best to meet them where they're at and start adding in these kind of superfoods and maybe different juices and things like that. Even popsicles. Like I'll ask the parents if they can make like a watermelon or blueberry juice popsicle for the kid. That's huge in terms of getting phytochemicals in their diet.
So I think I heard you say a minute or so ago that some of your clients are actually authors and people who are in the movement themselves.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I work with lots of those people because a lot of times, first of all, I work with therapists that are, with trauma therapists too. So it doesn't mean because you've written a book or you're out there teaching that that particular author or celebrity or person doesn't have their own issues. As a matter of fact, if you're a therapist and you're not in therapy, that's very questionable. And if you're in the nutrition and fitness field, many of the people in this movement came to this movement because they had eating disorders. They had their own
Uh-huh.
issues, just like many therapists become therapists because they had trauma. So it doesn't mean that they don't need fine tuning.
Well, they say in show business, somebody's a singer's singer or a
Right.
comedian's comedian. You're kind of a plant-based therapist.
Well, I look at myself as just a spoke on the wheel. We're all here to help and contribute, and we all can learn and grow. And so I'm always trying to learn also. There's so many people that came before me. I've been vegan for almost 40 years, but there's people that have been doing it longer. Dr. McDougall, Dr. Clapper, Dr. Sabantino, Dr. Goldhammer. Those people have been doing even longer than me. So
Okay.
imagine the experience they have. And so there's always something to learn. And that's why I still attend certifications and trainings, because the science is always changing and we need to keep up to date with that. But getting back to your point, one of the things is, even when I've worked with professional athletes, even though they're at a high level in their field, a lot of times I'm showing them stuff they've never done. They've never done. I've worked with the world sumo champion and judo champion, and there's stuff that I did with him that he'd never seen before. And so we can't be closed-minded. And that's one of the challenges of aging. That's what my background is really geriatrics, is that I've seen that as people get older, the blinders keep getting tighter and tighter, and they're less open to things. And so just because somebody is an instructor, it doesn't mean they can't be instructed.
Right. Now I'm trying to picture you working with a sumo champion. How
Yeah.
how did that happen, and what do you do for a sumo champion? You're not trying to make them slim.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Actually, yes, because in
Really?
that case, there's intervention that's needed, because somebody can be the world champion, but their lifestyle and diet is not going to allow them to continue to live. And so in that case, I switched them over to a plant-based diet. And so that's a whole story in itself. But
Well, tell us that story. I mean, a sumo champion might weigh how much?
400 pounds.
400 pounds.
And,
So you're working with a 400-pound guy.
and what's interesting is they do everything that we are supposed to not do. In other words, that we're supposed to finish eating as early as we can. Well,
Mhm.
they try to eat often as late as they can, right? So
Right.
they're getting that way, and they don't do a lot of movement. You'd be surprised. They don't really. They're very flexible. They do a lot of flexibility training, and they do a lot of kind of power. But it's not like they're on a treadmill. And so they're not, from a dietary standpoint, it's a horrible diet. And from a lifestyle standpoint, it's, other than the flexibility and power, it's horrible. There's nothing going on good for your heart.
All right,
So
but go ahead.
basically, it's kind of a unique balance, because you have to, if somebody still needs to be heavy, that's kind of like a tough call, because if you need to
Yeah.
be heavy for sumo, and my goal, or from the way I look at it, is my goal is to make sure you can get rid of that weight to save your heart and everything, then does that decrease your performance? And so that's kind of the thing. But with this particular person, they were really ready to retire and wanted to take care of their health. And I even took them to a vegan conference. I took them so they could see vegan speakers and everything like that. So, slowly getting into it. But, the truth is, you have to think, if you've been eating that way for, I'm not sure, I don't remember how old they were, but let's just say you've been eating horribly for 35 years. It's very difficult to make that transition to vegan. But, you do your best. But even if you can just get them to eat more plant-based foods, as I said earlier, that's a win in itself. just eat more plant-based foods, even though we add, say, for instance, they're eating more coconut, they're eating more nuts and seeds, or they're eating more avocados or something that we know we really shouldn't eat a lot of. But for them, I'd rather have them have obesity with a healthy fat than have obesity with an unhealthy animal fat. So they don't get the cholesterol and all the chemicals and heavy metals and things like that. So that's not really a great example to talk about because it's a tough one.
Yeah. So normally when you work with clients who want to lose weight, let's say someone is 100 pounds overweight, what kinds of exercises do you recommend? Because I know that you can't do anything too strenuous too soon, right?
Well, what's interesting is when somebody's 100 pounds overweight, I want you to imagine, Glenn, if you put a 100-pound backpack on, how strong your bones and how strong your legs would become week after week, month after month. So often these obese people have very strong legs, right? Their legs are very strong and their bone density is pretty darn good.
Right.
So one of the things that they don't have generally very good is their endurance, their cardio. So I like to see if I can get them in a pool because I know they're developing a lot of great bone density constantly, but their upper body needs some strength training, but their lower or their cardio system needs more work. And if I float them in water with an aqua vest on, they can literally run in 10 feet of water, just like they're running outside, but there's no trauma to their joints and it's not as hard. So I do things like that. I get them on a bike. I get them on different exercise machines that isn't traumatic to their joints. Whereas the average person, like for you or me, it's the opposite. I don't want you on a bike and I want you more moving and running and things like that. But for them, that pounding with that weight is just can be too much if we make it aggressive. Normal walking is okay. And then, of course, most weight loss comes from your diet. Only really if you're anorexic and you have massive caloric restriction and exhaustive exercise, that's when you really facilitate weight loss. But generally, exercise is for your health and your well-being, and it contributes somewhat to expenditure of calories, but it's not as effective as reducing the caloric load. So reducing the amount of calories, particularly fats.
Right.
But I also don't ever, like you've interviewed Shada before, and I just filmed with Shada like 10 different videos. And one of the things Shada was saying is that I never talk about with her weight loss, even when we started. Most of my clients, I never mention weight loss. And the reason is because that's a natural byproduct of healthy living. Her 150 pounds or whatever came off not because we were focusing on weight loss. It came because of healthy living. And so everybody wants to focus on weight loss with me, but I never, I don't weigh the clients. Generally, they know what they weigh when they come to see me. And then a year later, often they'll get a physical or they'll weigh themselves and they'll know how much they lost within a year. But I don't ever care about weighing, and I don't believe clients should weigh themselves because—
Do you tell them not to weigh themselves, or do you
Oh yeah,
advise
and
them
I don't
not?
believe in the scale because it's just a measure of gravitational pull. It's not really telling you how much body fat you lost. I don't know if you lost water. A lot of times you go on a high protein diet and you're losing all that water. So you step on the scale and you go, yay, I lost 4 pounds, but that's 4 pounds of water because all your carbohydrates have been decreased and the carbohydrates are holding water, glycogen, and the glycogen is getting released and you lose water and it looks like you lost weight. But you did lose weight, but you didn't lose body fat. And also you could be losing bone or you could be losing muscle. So the scale is really for fish. Fish should have scales, humans should, because it's not really anything I use. I want my client to look in the mirror, see how they look. How do their pants feel? How do their shirts feel? How do their bras feel? How does it feel when they bend down, when they move and they rotate? That's how you can tell. I had a client once come in the office that had been with me for over a year and lost, they knew what they weighed when they came in and they got a physical a year later. So they lost about 150 pounds and they were crossing and uncrossing their legs. And I said, what are you doing? And they said, this is the first time in my life I could cross and uncross my legs. So for them, that was a measure of, their body fat being gone.
Right. Now, how did you come to the vegan diet yourself?
Oh, okay. So I started in high school. So the two oral reports I did in high school, and that was 1983, were women's rights. So my first book, The Pillars of Health. So basically this book, Strong, Savvy, Safe, was
Yeah.
based on the lecture I did on women's rights. And
Now,
then,
wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hold up that book again. How many pages is that book?
oh, I don't know, a couple hundred,
Well, look inside. How many pages you got there?
about 200, 293.
293.
Yeah.
And that's based on a report you gave in high school?
Yeah, in high school. The premise of this book is based on that.
Well,
And
wait a minute. How long was that report?
it was just an oral talk,
An oral talk, and you turned it into a 293-page book?
well, yeah, but almost 35 years later. So,
All right. Well, what was the premise of that talk that it became a 293-page book?
well, the two talks that I did were one I did on animal rights, which is
Yeah.
basically kind of what my first book is, The Pillars of Health. And then the second one was the women's rights and women's safety. So those were just two things that I was concerned about in high school, or women's issues and animal issues, because I had started to learn about those. And so I just thought, well, gosh, this is meaningful to me. So I want to get this information out to my friends in school. And that's what I decided to talk about. And then after I graduated high school and all those years, I never stopped doing animal rights. And I worked with abused women for 30 years. And I worked in the women and children shelters in Chicago. And so that never stopped. I worked with the homeless. And then I worked with kids that were underprivileged. So that work just never stopped since high school.
Now, you work with people both on nutrition and on fitness, exercises, and psychologically. So what is your training in all three fields? Do you have separate, did you do separate trainings for these separate fields?
Yeah, most of my stuff was all certifications and like private training. And so like, even though I work with therapists and I attend therapy like retreats, like so I go to learn from the therapist, it's like a schooling. I'm not a therapist, right? And the same thing with like I have certifications in all sorts of different exercise, but I'm not an exercise physiologist. So I kind of tried to go to the levels of knowledge that I thought I needed, but I didn't want to go beyond and study stuff that I wouldn't need. So even though a lot of my friends are doctors and I like to keep up to date with different medical advances in science, well, I'm not degreed in those things.
Right. And so back in high school, when you got interested in animal rights, did you just decide that's it? I'm not eating any more animals?
Yeah,
And if so, at
because
what age?
well, that was senior year. So the reason why is because in my whole life, I loved the animals, but never once did I realize that when I was eating a hamburger, that was a cow, and the chicken McNuggets was a real chicken, and the fish fillet was a fish. I never put it together. And then I read about it. And I said, wait a minute, I've been eating, I'm eating these animals? And
Now,
that was
wait
it.
a minute. When you were 15 years old and you were eating a fried
Just
chicken
never,
or something, you didn't know it was a chicken?
never thought about it as a chicken. Just never, because I would never
Wow.
saw a chicken per se. I just had a chicken sandwich. And so once I read about it in high school, I was just shocked, and I immediately stopped eating that. And then I read about dairy, on how a cow is being sexually assaulted, produced milk, and the babies are taking from her. And that was it. That was done with milk. So, and then from there, I just kind of fine-tuned things. I learned about honey. I learned about silk. I learned about wool. I learned about all these things because PETA really became popular. They start getting out there in around 1981 or 82.
Oh, okay. PETA.
Yeah. So their magazines and stuff just start coming out, and their information, which really opened up a whole world because about wool and silk and leather and all these things. So I just kept learning as time went on. And then I really got involved in athletic training. I was an athletic trainer in high school. And so I started learning more about sports medicine and started studying under these sports medicine professionals and went to all these different certifications and seminars. So it just kind of all just worked out together.
Were you an athlete yourself?
Yeah, I was actually, I was the only trainer player at the same time. So I actually was the trainer for the team.
And what kind of team?
Soccer.
Soccer.
So I had to run out to the field, even though I was playing, I'd have to run and get tape and take care of the kid and things like that. So it was kind of funny. It was the only time there was a trainer player.
All right. We're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back with John Pierre. We're back talking with John Pierre. You could find his websites at johnpierre.com and livingwithharmony.org. JP, you do a lot of work with seniors and people suffering from different varying degrees of dementia. Tell us about that.
So that's really most of my career was that. Really, over 30 years ago, I created the first brain building programs, probably in the United States, using a plant-based diet. Back then, different nutraceuticals. And then I did brain building classes. And then I did physical boot camps for the seniors to develop, neuroplasticity, and it stimulated their balance and coordination. And I would go into retirement homes sometimes 2-3 times a week. And, I implement all these different programs, and then it kind of just swept the nation. I was all over Chicago doing it. And then I start going out of the state because many of these retirement homes had facilities elsewhere. And so I'd travel all over doing that. And that's really my love and passion, is working with the seniors, because, the one thing that I would say, even though I'm not a doctor, the scariest disease that I've seen working with clients for almost 40 years has been dementia. And it's not so much is it so scary just for the client, but it's absolutely devastating to the family and friends, because when you're coming in to see your mom or your dad and they say, "Hi, are you the doctor? I'm waiting for my daughter or my son." It's very, very tough to deal with, and it's very hard and it's stressful on the family. So I really spent most of my career doing that. And I still do. I still work with the seniors, privately. And I don't do as many seminars in retirement homes, but I still do them. And so one of the things that I did back then that I still do today, obviously, was a plant-based diet for seniors. Back then, we didn't have all the different supplements and all the superfoods, but I did have them get blueberry juice and like Ezekiel bread. So we would take a bus trip to like Trader Joe's, and I'd make sure that everyone got blueberry juice, and I'd make sure everyone got Ezekiel bread, because I wanted them to supplement their diet at the retirement homes with healthier foods, things that had protective qualities for the brain. And then, of course, I worked on changing their diet, on other ways, and had them made better choices at the retirement home. And then I brought in food for them to always try and samples. But when they'd sit down, they'd all get paper and pencil. And first thing I'd have them do is write their name with their opposite hand 10 times. That's almost what they did religiously. And some of them, when I'd first started a retirement home, couldn't even pick up a pencil in their opposite hand. They had arthritis, so bad they could barely grab that. But eventually, many of the seniors could write their names, some of them, as well with their dominant as their non-dominant hand. So it just took practice. And then we did a lot of different brain exercises. And then we did the physical class. I used to take an industrial strength bubble machine, and I put it on a table with wheels. And the seniors would all be standing around me with chopsticks, and I'd put on classical music, and they had to catch the bubbles with the chopsticks. So they were moving in all these different directions that they normally wouldn't move, and they had to have great proprioception and balance and spatial awareness and hand-eye coordination. And those were exercises designed to stimulate that neuroplasticity and new pathways in the brain. So that's pretty much what I still do, but to a lesser degree than when I started over 30 years ago with that.
Now, when you work with patients with dementia, is the goal simply to stop the decline, or can you reverse it to any degree?
No one that I know of has really been able to reverse, obviously, dementia. And I'm a little concerned when I see books and programs that talk about that, because I don't think that's really ethical. But you're right. The idea is to try to slow or halt the progression. And that's even, many people just get mild cognitive impairment. It's not really like an Alzheimer's or a Lewy body or frontal temporal, it's not like a real per se dementia. But, we lose brain functioning as you get older if you're not using your brain. So I'll give you an example, like one client that I work with that's, 83, I think it is now. Their family was very concerned about their mental well-being, and it wasn't great when I started, but training them via Zoom on all these exercises and changing their diet, and then seeing them in person too. I'll give you an example of one thing that they could do. So when they first started, it was very difficult, a lot of these exercises, but I'd have them start counting 1 to 10, but they had to spell it out. So ONETWOTHREE, right? And they got to the point where they could do that in about 5 seconds. So ONETWOTHR, which is amazing. Then I progressed it to months of the year in alphabetical order. So they had to give me the months of the year in alphabetical order: April, August, December, February, etc. And they got to the point, you won't even believe this, like you might do it now, or anybody, not me, because I've done it before, might take a couple minutes, but they got to the point where they could do it in about 6 seconds. And that's remarkable. And the reason why that's remarkable is because somebody came in with impairment, even though they're 83 now, they're probably 82 or so. And with all this hard work, they were able to improve that much. That should give hope to almost anybody, that with constant repetition and training and doing these exercises, you can do it. Because what I do a lot of times when I'm teaching at a vegetarian or vegan conference, I ask them, I say, I'm going to set my timer right now, and I want you to give me the months of the year in alphabetical order, and I'm going to tell you when my client is done. And I go. And then I say, stop 5 seconds later, and everybody's still trying to figure out April, right? And they're shocked that an 83-year-old woman who came in with impairment can do it. So there is hope. But to say, can you reverse dementia? Let's say you can get your brain better, but I would never say you could reverse dementia. And remember, things like Alzheimer's, that particular dementia, a lot of the brain scientists only think it's about 3% genetic. They think the rest is lifestyle, factors.
Well, do you think, as I suspect, that meat contributes to Alzheimer's?
Well, sure, because many of these dementias are vascular. And so when you have an occlusion or these arteries close up, you're not getting enough blood flow to the brain. So imagine, Glenn, if you were driving on a 4-lane expressway and all of a sudden there was a traffic accident and now only 1 lane was open. Imagine how slow that bottleneck traffic would move. That's what's happening in the arteries, especially the carotid or vertebral, that are giving blood flow to the brain. They're getting occluded and closed up, in some cases 80%. So the senior's not getting enough oxygen. They're not getting enough nutrients to the brain. And that's that vascular dementia. So one of the main things that I try to do is I try to increase vasodilation, which is through exercise. Maybe things, if we can handle some nuts, that are high in arginine, that can help in this nitric oxide pathway. Because with the nitric oxide, when you're eating dark greens like arugula and you're creating nitric oxide, it's the same as taking like Viagra or nitroglycerin. They just open up the blood vessels. And so I try to get that done via exercise and diet changes. I use some different powders. I use Beet Boost, which is a beet drink with tart cherries in there. But I get them to eat a lot of nitric oxide producing greens, particularly dark greens, and like arugula is one of the best. And then, of course, I have them do a lot of breathing exercises and movement to facilitate that. But, Dr. Dean Ornish has shown in the early 90s that he can reverse, they showed angiograms of the artery actually opening up through a plant-based diet, stress control or meditation and exercise. So we know it's possible. And so that you're making a good point. Reducing the fat and getting the arteries open is one of the biggest problems with cognitive decline. Now, in the vegan community, though, there's other problems that aren't even related to that, like B12 deficiency and low DHA levels.
Okay. Now, do you ever work with seniors who are suffering cognitive decline? Their memory isn't good. Their understanding isn't good. Their comprehension. They forget names, forget their own history, perhaps, but have an awareness of these deficits. Do you have seniors who are aware that they're not what they used to be, and they're conscious enough to suffer that?
Sure, of course, lots of them, and they're not seniors; they're young people. When I started my career so long ago, I was seeing in my office in Chicago younger and younger people coming in with cognitive decline. And not only were we seeing kids with attention deficit and some hyperactivity, but we were seeing younger adults that were losing, they didn't have ability to focus, their memory wasn't really good. And which brings me to my whole point of you're trying to maximize their nourishment to get nutritional excellence, because those neurotransmitters are created from amino acids and facilitated with B vitamins. And if you're not getting the necessary proteins and B vitamins, and you're eating a diet that's high in sugar that gobbles up B vitamins, so you can, in order to turn sugar into energy, B vitamins are needed in that process. So the more refined sugar you're eating, which kids are, we're eating on average about 150 pounds of sugar per person per year in the United States. They're already getting a nutrient deficient diet. And then what little B vitamins they have are being gobbled up by the sugar. Of course, they're going to have decline. And so that's very common, but it's not only the kids, it's young adults and particularly seniors, because seniors don't eat well in these retirement homes. They have terrible diets, horrible, some of the worst I've ever seen. And they don't masticate or chew well, and they have poor hydrochloric acid, so they don't digest or break apart foods well. So those proteins that don't get broken apart, there's so much fiber that, at least in our world that we're eating, if you're an elder vegan, and you have poor digestion and don't chew well, you're not able to get all those amino acids that you need from your food, and that's a problem.
Yeah. My father suffered from Parkinsonian dementia, and it was a steady decline, but there were periods when he was aware of it. I remember taking him to a neurologist, and so the neurologist asked him questions in front of my mother and in front of me and in front of his caregiver. Simple questions like, what year is it? He didn't know.
Yeah.
What kind of a building are you in now? He didn't know. How old are you? He didn't know. And then she asked him, what state are you in? And he said, confusion. So he I don't know if he thought he was joking, but he had that awareness.
Well, it's one of the reasons that I'm so compelled to do the work that I do, because I saw that in retirement homes and adult daycare centers and nursing facilities. I saw that for so many years, and it was so sad to see that happen to anybody, but it was equally devastating to see that happen to the families. And so I really try hard to get that information out. In my first book, The Pillars of Health, there's a whole segment in here on minding your marbles. So we talk about, doing things to enhance cognitive functioning. And again, it's that healthy diet that we're talking about, but it's also the exercise. It's also certain supplements. And one of the key things, and we didn't even get into this because this is a whole podcast in itself, is stress reduction and love and compassion and connection. Those are such important components of especially reducing stress, because once stress goes up and your cortisol levels are high, that area in your brain that's responsible for memory and creativity, the hippocampus, gets destroyed. When they've done MRIs on soldiers and people at high levels of stress, that hippocampus is almost shrunk to almost nothing. It's actually hippocampi. There's two of them, but they basically shrunk to nothing. So stress control, relaxation, breathing, all those are all components that I utilize with my clients and in retirement homes.
Do you utilize yoga?
Of course. I mean, I've taught in India, so I've been involved in yoga for a long time. The difference is that I don't teach just asanas or postures. I'm more into teaching the philosophy, the 8 limbs of yoga. I'm interested in teaching the ahimsa and the satya, the truthfulness, and the tenets of yoga, not just postures. Postures are great, but when you go to India, they're kind of confused on why in the United States we're wearing all these colorful leotards and calling it yoga, and all we're doing is stretching. It's like that's one component. It'd be like showing your thumb and saying that's your hand. It's like, no, your thumb is part of your hand, but there's other fingers too.
All right. Now, you also do a lot of environmentally related work, right? Tell us about that.
Right. So our nonprofit and animal sanctuary is livingwithharmony.org. And you can follow us on Instagram, we're there, or Facebook too. And we coined a term, Glenn, called planet-based living. So it's a takeoff plant-based. And what it is it's veganism kind of on steroids, or the way veganism really originally was, where you're concerned about not just yourself, but you're concerned about all expressions of life. You're concerned about the plants and the air and the water, the soil, all the insects. That's what planet-based living is. And one of our main objectives is to get people to stop using single-use plastics. And one of the reasons I'm so adamant about when people use like supplements, make sure you buy things that are in glass. One, you want to support a company that's using glass and not plastic, but also you don't want to be ingesting a superfood that's organic and really, expensive, and it's a wonderful product. You don't want that being in a plastic bottle. When that bottle gets heated and that plastic, those plasticizers, whether it's BPA or phthalates, get into your food, because we're taking in about a credit card of plastic a week. And so if you can imagine a credit card, imagine every week you ingest one of those. And at the end of the year, you ingested 52 credit cards. And scientists are in an uproar now because they're finding plastic in freshly fallen snow in the Arctic. Cardiologists are finding plastic in the heart. Most people who have done blood tests are finding plastic in their system. And there's no way to escape it if you're going to continue to still use foods and products that are in plastic, because it's already pumped in the air. We can't do anything about that unless we have higher regulations and laws, but you can change what's in your food. So go to farmers markets and buy your fruits and vegetables and bring your own bag. You don't need to go to the store and have it wrapped in plastic. And especially items like that are acidic, like vinegars and tomato sauces, buy those in glass because they're acidic and they can start eating away that plastic, and then you are ingesting that plastic.
Have you managed to live your life without using plastic?
No, but in food-wise, that's not that hard. But I mean, like, there's plastic in my phone or plastic in a computer, or, they're plastic everywhere. But like bags, like our organization, we actually go to different like veterinarian clinics and things, and we collect their plastic, and then we pay to make sure it's recycled properly, because only about 9% of what you supposedly think you're recycling gets recycled. It really doesn't. You have to go to a special facility that we pay to, and they turn it into Trex decking. So they turn it into something again. But most of the plastic doesn't. And a good saying to remember is, when you throw something away, where is away? Because when you have a plastic bag and you put it in the garbage, it goes into a landfill, and eventually it'll get eaten away, and part of it will blow away, and it'll get into a waterway, and it ends up in the ocean, and sea turtles think it's a jellyfish and they eat it. And so all these sea life and these birds now are eating these bits of plastic. Some birds are regurgitating food to their baby, and they've shown photos and videos where they regurgitate all plastic. They're showing them cigarette butts, plastic bottle caps, pieces of plastic. So it's omnipresent. But to get to your question, yes, what I try to do is I try to buy my products in glass, and I want to support these companies because it's more expensive for them to pack in glass, and it's more expensive for them to ship it. But if they're going to put it in glass, I'm going to support them. And then with food, I really try to support farmers markets if I can, or, going to the store that has it loose as much as I can. Now, sometimes when I travel, it's not always easy, but I do make sure, like if I couldn't get fresh blueberries and I bought frozen blueberries in a bag, I wash that bag out, and then I bring it back with me, and then I pay for it to be recycled. There's an organization called Ridwell that gives you this metal box at your house, and twice or three times a month, they come and pick up the plastic, and they actually do recycle it into, like I said, Trex decking and different things.
How is the state of glass recycling? Is that better than the plastic recycling?
Well, yeah. And what I do is, what the best thing to do is, if you buy from Health Force, then just soak these bottles when you're done with them, and peel off the label, and then just store your cut up vegetables in here. And it looks beautiful in your refrigerator because you can put a label on here, and then just put carrots or celery or soup. And so you can just keep reusing the bottles. But glass is always getting recycled. Where plastic, even if it gets recycled, it has a very short life. It can get recycled. And each time it's often emitting more chemicals into the air. And remember, these plastics, are endocrine disruptors, and scientists are very concerned. They link some of the obesity problems we have to these endocrine disruptors in the foods that we're getting. And also they're not only contributing to obesity, but immunological problems because they can damage the immune system.
Every week I take my recycling container to the curb, and it's got glass and plastic in it. So am I right in guessing that they're doing a better job of recycling the glass than the plastic?
The glass is fine. Yeah. We don't have to see. The one thing about the glass is it's not leaching into your food. And so that's problem number one. That's for you. It's not leaching, but for
Right.
the environment, even if glass got into the ocean, it falls down and it'll basically just turn into sand.
Right.
And an animal's not going to eat glass, whereas an
Right.
animal will eat floating plastic.
But they do maybe recycle that glass and it
Yeah,
gets
because
used again?
glass is forever. But plastic, it's cheaper for them to make plastic bags than to recycle the plastic bags. Matter of fact, Asia is not taking our plastic recycling anymore. We used to ship it over there. They're not taking it anymore. And the United States is actually paying some countries, little tiny countries, to take our plastic. And guess what they do with it? They just burn it. So all they're doing is we're just shipping it to their country, and they're just polluting the air, and it's coming back to the United States again anyhow. So my suggestion is avoid plastic as much as you can for your health and for the environment. And you're going to see, like, and the environmental people, we've been talking about this for 20 years, but the scientists now are up in arms about the plastic in the body and the damage it causes. So be very concerned about that for yourself. And the people who should be the most concerned are children, because their little detoxifying organs are so small, but they're ingesting so much plastic and they're breathing it.
Okay. Now, I've had two guests on my show before, Shada Soleimani and Rebecca Martinez, who each had dramatic weight losses. Shada lost, I don't know, 150 pounds or something, and
Yeah.
Rebecca over 200 pounds. And
Yeah.
you worked with both of them.
Yeah, I did. Matter of fact, we
So
were just filming this.
I'm sure they would not mind at all having you tell us a little bit about how you help them lose all that weight.
Well, you know, one thing was interesting with Shada is that her doctor told her, and she talks about this publicly, it would take a Herculean effort to ever lose weight and keep it off. And she went into a state of depression after hearing that. And when she came to me, she was in a boot with a torn, I think it was, I don't remember if it was a ligament or a tendon. And she was so depressed, and she thought, well, now that she's in a boot, she's never going to be able to exercise, because she loved exercise. And then she tells the story that she never exercised harder in her entire life than she worked with me in the boot. And so one of the things that did is it really boosted her confidence and got her out of depression. And once she started losing weight, she started realizing what this doctor said was crazy. And so he had kind of a hold on her mentally. And then all of a sudden that was gone. And she started building up her self-confidence. And then what the craziest thing was, she went back to have an MRI on her leg, because I think it was a handful of doctors said you'd have to have surgery. And they said to her that we don't really quite understand it, but your I don't remember if it was a tendon or ligament, is healed and you don't need surgery. And so she was even more confident then. And so she just started building up her confidence, you know, time after time after time. But Shada worked harder than her, and Rebecca worked harder than most people. And, you know, that's the thing, Glenn, is a lot of people will hear their stories and they come to me and they want to work with me. And then after a week or two, they wonder, why didn't they lose 12 pounds? It's like, it doesn't work that way. This takes tremendous amount of work, and you have to be slow and steady with it. And you have to work, like Shada always says, you know, when I first saw you, JP, you made me cry. And that's because we did emotional work. And Rebecca will say the same thing, not that she cried, but Rebecca will say this was hard emotional stuff that we did. And because that's as you asked me earlier, how do you know what to work on? Well, somebody doesn't get to be 150 pounds or 200 pounds overweight by being a balanced individual. And Shada always says in interviews, the one thing JP always said to me is people who love themselves don't hurt themselves. And so we worked a lot on self-love. And as that started getting ingrained in her system, when she would have a challenge with something, she'd say, wait a minute, I love myself. I'm not going to ingest that because that's not a loving food. And so that helped her. So we kind of just worked with both her and Rebecca. You know, they were different times I've worked with them. But it was just, you know, that whole approach with everything.
Okay. Now you've got a retreat coming up. in May, right? In the Chicago
Yes, and
area? Tell us about
Jada will
that.
be there and Rebecca will be there, as they have every year. So it's
Oh,
May
really?
22nd.
They come every year.
Oh, yeah, sure. May 22nd through the 26th. And what's unique about the retreat is it's about, I think it's about a 1,200-acre monastery. It's where the priests and nuns go to school. And we kind of take over everything. And there's a giant lake there. And it's so pristine. Most people just want to stay outside the whole time. But it's a retreat. So it's not like a conference where it's one class after another. I do unique classes. So we don't just talk about food. I might have a little bit on food and food addiction, but we bring in a trauma therapist. We're bringing in one of the top criminal psychologists that was a Secret Service agent also. And she's going to be presenting on developing resilience. And then we're bringing in a man who is a monk and a yogi. He's called the food yogi, and he's going to be talking more about the spirituality of food. And then I'm teaching classes on the brain. I'm teaching them on love and compassion. We exercise every morning, a lot of balance, fall prevention, and skill development. And then we walk throughout the day. And then we break out into groups and do a lot of introspection. We bring in a trauma therapist. So we work on a lot of different traumatic things, issues that may have occurred when you were a child or young. So it's a very comprehensive program. And all the meals are SOS free. And the meals were created by Rebecca and Shada. So they're the ones who created the meals for the conference.
That's great. Now, what if somebody comes to the conference in very poor physical shape and they're eating the standard American diet? Is there any training on nutrition within the conference?
Yes, of course. The problem is most of the people that come to these events, like your audience, they know about nutrition. So I don't want to spend more time just talking about the basics. So we go into a little basics for new people, but then we go a lot into food addiction too. But it's funny because we had a couple come last year that were regular meat eaters. And during the conference, they were showing me how their belt size has already been decreasing after a couple of days. And then they went, they really got into the plant-based thing and the environmental thing, because I talk about the environment a lot. So yeah, we get on Facebook and we connect with people about 2 months before the conference, and we let people know if you're not plant-based yet, we want you to start including more plant-based food so your gut can get used to it. Because there it's just SOS free. It's all sugar-free, oil-free, oil, sugar, oil, and salt free. So we want you to be ready for it.
If people want to get more information about the retreat, where do they go?
Yeah, if you go to johnpierre.com, and then there's a tab that says Pillars of Health Retreat. And we don't have a lot of openings left because we only take about 60 people. So there's still some room, but you definitely want to get in while you can. And like I said, we keep it small because we want it to be intimate. We want you to get to know every instructor, and we want you to spend time with me and get to know everybody. And everybody's so nice. Everybody who comes is just a great people.
You don't let any mean people in, right?
Well, usually people are not drawn to it because when they tell them when I let them know we focus about love and compassion and kindness and the environment, they're not usually drawn to that. But if they are, I work with them very closely and make sure I'm with them.
All right. Now, last question. You say that you work using a blend of science and ancient modalities. What are the ancient modalities that you use?
Yeah. So when I did my first book, The Pillars of Health, funny thing is one of the modalities that I use for almost all my clients, two of them I'll talk about, are vision boards and essential oils. And this publisher had offered me a lot of money for the book because I was working with Ellen DeGeneres back then, and everybody wanted me to do a book. And they offered me a lot of money for the book, and I turned it down. And the reason why is because they didn't want me to do vision boards and essential oils. And I said, there's no way I could not include those in my book because those are two modalities that I use with 100% of my clients. And they're probably two of the most important and effective modalities that I could use. So I turned that book deal down or earned barely nothing with the publisher I chose, but that publisher allowed me to do what I want. So essential oils and aromatherapy are so important because remember, the olfactory nerve in your nose leads directly to your brain. And one of the ways to stimulate brain functioning is to use scents, or you can use essential oils. I can go into a retirement home and I would have client people there that were 90, and I could let them smell, let's say, apple pie spice. They couldn't remember what they ate for breakfast yesterday, but as soon as you give them apple pie spice, they're going back, 80 years when they were a kid and their mom used to bake apple pie. right? So now all of a sudden you've got them in the state that they're telling me about their mom and the kitchen design, and their mom used to wear a little rose on her apron. You're taking them back 80 years because of one little scent. And then once we have them in that state, we want to keep letting them talk about that. We want to keep getting that brain stimulated. What did your mom say every Sunday when she was baking the pie? Do you remember how she folded the dough over? What color were the apples? And it's an amazing thing what you can do with essential oils. So essential oils are one of them. Believe it or not, I use a lot of color therapy. So I'm very conscientious of colors that I use when I'm working with people who are depressed. And you want to have certain colors that foster relaxation, or the opposite, if you want to foster energy. You can combine essential oils with colors. And then I use a lot of the modalities that I use come from martial arts. So especially like Tai Chi or Qigong or Aikido, those modalities, especially Tai Chi, we use a lot of those movements to develop balance and coordination and fall prevention. And then, of course, the yogic practices are probably the most widely used that I do, as yogic practices, different components of more of developing what I call your code of conduct, your coat of arms and what you represent. So more emotional stuff. And then lots of spirituality, like the word ahimsa, which is a Sanskrit term meaning compassion and reverence for all expressions of life. That is the core of everything I teach. So that kindness and love is something we're always working on developing.
Well, JP, you are one of a kind. And I hope this retreat is a marvelous success for everybody who attends. I'm sure it will be. And again, people can find you at johnpierre.com and livingwithharmony.org. Thanks, JP. It's been great getting to know you today.
Thank you, Glenn. And thanks for having this podcast out and helping so many people. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.